But we begin tonight with manufacturing consent, a concept introduced by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky in their 1988 book on the political economy of the mass media. Here's a clip from the 1992 documentary of the same name.
But when the state loses the bludgeon, when you can't control people by force, and when the voice of the people can be heard, you have this problem. It may make people so curious and so arrogant that they don't have the humility to submit to a civil rule, and therefore you have to control what people think.
In short, it is the job of the media, our job, to not just tell you what happened, but to give you some context around what happened in a way that informs you and helps you make decisions in your busy life. But too often, what the media actually does is create a mass consensus around the preferences of the financial and moneyed elite to subtly make their preferences your preferences. This is especially true in selling wars and sometimes elections. In the November election to come, which, let's just be honest, could be our last free and fair election due to the machinations of a certain political religious cult, the wealthiest Americans have a clear preference for the outcome: Donald Trump reinstalled as president. Mother Jones recently reported the following in an article about America's top donors heavily favoring Trump and the Republicans, which reflects something we've long known about rich conservatives: their disdain for taxation. Mother Jones reports that Donald Trump may have lost in the Manhattan court, where a jury convicted him of all 34 felony charges of falsifying business records. But, quote, there's one place he and his party appear to be winning: in the race to snag major cash from the richest families in America. For all of Trump's supposed grassroots appeal, as of May 1st, less than 1/3 of contributions to his campaign committee for the 2024 election cycle had come from grassroots donors. That means people giving less than $200. According to Open Secrets, large contributors accounted for 69% of Trump's $121 million total, whereas President Biden's campaign committee, which took in $195 million, got 54% from large donors. More broadly, the lion's share of confirmed contributions from the biggest political givers, the top 100 families, have flowed to Republican candidates and groups. Then there's something called hard money. This is the money contributed directly to a specific candidate, and these are donations that the federal government caps. In the hard money category, Mother Jones reports that Republicans took in 27% more from the top 100 families than Democrats did. In dollar terms, that's about $86 million for the Republicans versus about $68 million for the Democrats. But if you include soft money, the unlimited donations that the Supreme Court made possible through their Citizens United ruling during and maybe in response to President Obama getting elected by a 10 million vote margin, it's not even close. Quoting Mother Jones again, Republicans raked in a whopping $508 million from the top 100, triple the Democrats' $169 million take. It's a lot of numbers and data, but it may leave you wondering, why would America's wealthiest families continue pouring money into a political party that has stripped itself of its dignity to fashion itself into a religious cult centered around a 78-year-old 37-count felon and adjudicated sexual abuser? Well, Michael Mechanic of Mother Jones, who authored the piece that I'm quoting from, has a pretty good guess. Biden and the Dems have spooked America's richest with their multiple and largely unsuccessful efforts to close abusive loopholes and raise taxes on corporations and the upper crust. That includes efforts to tax the unrealized gains of the mega rich. The paper profits on appreciated investments that are currently only taxed when the assets are sold. In the meantime, Trump and the Republicans are fighting to extend their unpopular and ultimately disappointing 2017 tax cuts, a move the Congressional Budget Office calculates will cost the U.S. government $3.5 trillion with a T over 10 years. So what does that have to do with manufacturing consent? Well, it probably wouldn't go over too well if you, gentle viewer, understood that setting Trump up as an autocrat is merely the price that the super rich are willing to make you pay just to stuff more tax cut cash into their already deep pockets. Much better to make you believe that the people who really want Trump back in charge are closer to home. Which brings me to Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the great dads out there. Now, if you're a practicing Christian, a lot of you saints may have spent at least part of yesterday in church, celebrating your dads and, of course, the Heavenly Father. And in America, that tends to be a, shall we say, highly segregated experience. No one seems to know who originated the quote, but it's been repeated by everyone from James Baldwin, who said he was quoting Malcolm X, to Dr. King, that the most segregated hour in American life is 11 a.m. on a Sunday. It's just a factual legacy of this nation's history with race and religion that there are predominantly white churches and there are black churches. But what do you think of when you think of a black church? Probably something like this. Now, you may even think of images such as these. But what you probably don't think of is this.
What a nice welcome. Thank you.
That is the reaction to Donald Trump at what nearly every major media outlet reported was his visit to a black church in Detroit, Michigan, one of the 10 blackest cities in America, with a population that's about 78% African American and a poverty rate topping 33%. In other words, it would be hard not to fill a Detroit church with black people. So now I want you to look with your eyes. Just look with your eyes again at this crowd. Is what you're seeing here what you would write in a headline is a black church? And yet, here was the headline in the New York Times: Trump, in pitch to black voters in Detroit, cast Biden as anti-black. And the Washington Post: Trump portrays rampant crime in speech at black church in Detroit. In the Associated Press: Trump blasts immigrants for taking jobs as he courts voters at a black church MAGA event in Detroit. The Detroit Free Press even ran a photo series online with the headline, Trump visits Detroit church to woo black voters. But what they somehow forgot to show was how overwhelmingly white that crowd was, and also how many empty seats there were in that sanctuary. In fact, if you looked at the carefully selected images in their online story, you would probably guess the crowd inside that sanctuary was overwhelmingly black and pro-Trump, literally cheering for him and chanting his name. And you would be forgiven for believing that this reinforces what seems to be the new hot narrative, that it is black people, specifically black men, who are driving Trump back into the White House with their overwhelming and historically growing support. When the actual reality that you can see with your own eyes and know if you peel back the layers just a little bit is that Trump spoke to an overwhelmingly white crowd inside a large Detroit church that, yes, does indeed have a black pastor, but which merely served as a venue. And that the people who participated in the roundtable, like those in the audience at that church, were already Trump supporters, not some new historic black supporters of Trump. Trump was in Detroit to participate in something called the People's Convention, a weekend-long gathering arranged by Turning Point Action, a conservative grassroots group founded by activist Charlie Kirk. It would have been easy enough to ask some of the attendees at that roundtable if they came to that church from the convention. And while several of these stories note that Trump harped on crime as part of his presentation, doesn't it seem kind of ironic and pretty relevant that the guy saying that just recently got convicted of 34 felony counts in New York? I mean, Trump raised the crime rate in Detroit just by being there. And one of his new friends at that event, Kwame Kilpatrick, Detroit's former mayor, is just 4 years out of prison himself, where he was sentenced to 28 years for his role in a wide-ranging racketeering conspiracy that included fraud, extortion, and tax crimes. Kilpatrick extorted city vendors, rigged bids, and took kickbacks and bribes. He used funds from nonprofit civic organizations to line his pockets and those of his family, steering millions of dollars to himself and his friends as Detroit plunged deeper into poverty. Kilpatrick was released because Trump commuted his sentence in 2020. So, of course, now he's endorsed him. But it's weird, right? How many of the black men endorsing Trump are formerly prominent and famous black men who have criminal records? Not like the criminal records this country has racked up for black men through things like the war on drugs. Nope. For crimes they committed after they were prominent and or rich. Kind of like Donald Trump. Also on hand as part of Trump's Blacks for Trump coalition, black Republican Congressman John James, who represents an overwhelmingly white, affluent district in Macomb and Sterling Heights, Michigan, meaning not that district, whose congresswoman is Rashida Tlaib. Also, Detroit native and former Trump HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson, who hasn't lived in Detroit since he was a child, and more recently has lived in mansions in places like Virginia and Florida. The ever-present Trump apologist Byron Donalds, whose majority white district is also in Florida, and a claque of local Detroit rappers who, apologies, I confess, I've never heard of. The church where Trump held this town hall is called 180 Church. The pastor, Lorenzo Sewell, is a Detroit native who grew up in an abusive home, with his father going to prison when he was a teenager. His experience with the criminal justice system did not happen when he was already rich and famous. He became a drug dealer and gang member as a troubled kid, the way it tragically happens for so many Americans in communities with high rates of poverty. But he had a conversion experience his senior year in high school in 1999, according to his church bio, and later became a pastor. Here he is, claiming Biden and Obama never visited the hood.
President Trump, I'm so humbled that you would be here. President Obama never came to the hood, so to speak, right? President Joe Biden, he went to the big NAACP dinner, but he never came to the hood. So thank you.
This is the part where I point out that President Obama came to Michigan 15 times as president, including Detroit. Pastor Sewell also claimed it's hard to find a black barber in Detroit for his Blasian kids, which honestly was weird. And in an interview on Fox after the roundtable, he quoted something you've probably never heard of called the Platinum Plan, a black wealth plan he claimed Donald Trump created, but which actually was the idea of rapper Ice Cube. So not a Trump plan at all. And I'll add this. It is ironic that Trump is attempting to court black voters in Detroit just 4 years after lying about black voters in Detroit and claiming their votes were inherently fraudulent. Michigan was one of the states whose votes Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and their little cabal tried to steal in their insurrection. The Attorney General in Michigan has charged 16 people with felonies for trying to steal the votes of black Michiganders from Detroit.
We've done more for, and I say this, I say it proudly, more for the black population than any president since Abraham Lincoln. That's a big statement. But we achieved the lowest African-American unemployment rate and the lowest African-American poverty rate ever recorded during my 4 years.
Nope. None of that is true, no matter how many times Trump says it. The lowest black unemployment rate and black poverty rate have both come during President Biden's term, not Trump's. Joining me now are Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and MSNBC political analyst, and Judd Legum, author of Popular Information. I'm going to give you the first crack at this, Basil. Your thoughts on the Trump at Black Church moment?
Devious and deceptive that he would airbrush black people into his political event like that, especially when the audience itself is not black. I have no words for that because I don't know who actually really does it for Donald Trump. On Detroit specifically, I just want to say, I have friends who are architects and urban planners in that great city, and they talk a lot about how block by block they're bringing arts and culture and economic development to the city of Detroit, which reminds me of all the things that Donald Trump says about whether it's Detroit or Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., or the Bronx, where I grew up. What is the connective tissue when he badmouths those cities? It's that they're black-led cities, that they're majority black voters. He uses that as a dog whistle, obviously, and it angers me because what he doesn't do, and a lot of conservatives do not do, is talk about what government has done for generations to create the kind of conditions in those cities that he is now sort of trying to talk about. They don't talk about that, nor do they ever talk about the people on the ground who are not passive in all of this. Black and brown people who are not at all passive and are actually trying to and have success in building some of these neighborhoods back. I've seen it in the Bronx. Folks come and go. It's like popcorn, but it is performative. It's insulting, and I really hope folks don't go for the okie doke, because that's really what it is.
Well, the other piece of it, to stay with you just for a moment, is that there is, I call it blackstro-turfing at this point, right? Like they're literally trying to create this fake grassroots movement. And part of it is around trying to lure people in with cash and say, hey, look, we're going to dangle this Trump money at you. Let you listen to Mr. Sewell, Reverend Sewell, on Friday. He went right on Fox and got his star turn. Here he is on Fox talking about an economic plan for the black community.
He
he laid out an agenda. Can't remember any president, quite frankly, that ever laid out an agenda for Black America. Our former president, he put together an agenda called the Platinum Plan, and those numbers are approximately $500 billion to disseminate to Black businesses, Black churches, to be able to help the least of these. And those metrics matter to us.
Wrong. That's Ice Cube that created that, Basil. It's an Ice Cube plan. He's now attributing it to Trump to try to sell Black people on the idea that Trump has an economic plan for Black folks. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, a couple of things. One, just because you're around Black people doesn't mean you know Black people. And he has this tendency to surround himself with a lot of celebrities, thinking that we, like he, is transactional. That's not how this goes. That's not how this goes. But he surrounds himself with folks, with whether it's pastors or celebrities or others, where he thinks he puts a little money their way or tries to give them a kind of access and think that that alone is going to drive Black people to the polls. We saw that when he started talking about his sneakers that he was selling, for crying out loud. It is incredibly insulting and reductive. And we know and I'll just say this very quickly on the economics. If you look at the Heritage Fund's Project 2025, that's everything you need to know economically about what he's going to do for Black people, from cradle to career.
Yeah, indeed. Let me get Judd in here, because you've got a new piece out, because the other piece of this manufacturing consent is trying to get people to believe visuals that aren't real and trying to get people to believe ideas that aren't real. And now that's not just being laundered through Fox. It's also going through your Traffic and Weather Together. Tell me your update on what Sinclair is doing.
Yes, Sinclair Broadcast Group, which has almost 200 affiliates branded, NBC, CBS, and all sorts of other affiliates. They're pushing through their websites information that was originally put out there by the Republican National Committee through their Twitter account, now X, basically deceptively clipping video to make it seem like Biden is freezing, or in some cases they're claiming he's soiling himself, and then taking these, wrapping them up as if they are news articles and distributing them to every single affiliate news website, and doing it repeatedly day after day, and really driving home this false message of Biden's fitness for office based on these video clips.
And by the way, let me just show you this. They did a huge fundraiser, about $30 million fundraiser in L.A. with actual celebrities, not Trump's version of them. And there is this moment where Biden is waving to the audience. This is a 9 for my director here. He's waving to the audience, and he stops to really greet the crowd, and then Obama comes over to him. This is now being manufactured as the idea to essentially say, you know what, just give in. You must put Trump back in because Biden is enfeebled. Trump has this grassroots fake support, this black turf support. The blacks want him in. It's not the rich. It's that, look at him. Look at Biden. It is not true. He was fine. But they are creating this narrative, Judd.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly pernicious because, look, if you're tuning into Fox News, you pretty much know what you're going to get. But these local affiliates are stations that are watched by actual swing voters, and they're not anticipating a partisan message. These are trusted news anchors. About 70% of Americans still trust their local news to give them accurate information. So by weaponizing these affiliates and using them to push a very dishonest partisan message, they're really driving this message home to the exact people that they want to reach and that could potentially be persuaded.
And I am old enough to remember back in 2012, as President Obama faced his reelect, all the headlines said he's going to be a one-term president. No way he gets reelected. And you know what they hinged that on? They claimed he was losing support from black people. This is happening every 4 years when it's a Democratic president because tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. That's all this is about. That's what the rich want. Basil Smikle, Judd Legum, thank you both very much.